picking up where we left off, what I want to talk to you about today, and you probably have noticed this already, and that is that when we're talking about the Gothic and medieval in Northern Europe, it's pretty much centered around the church. And the architecture is largely cathedrals and chapels and monasteries. And we don't see too much of the secular world in all of this. And the manuscript illustrations and the sculptures typically made to be placed inside or be part of the cathedrals. And so anyway, that does reflect something. It reflects an idea, it reflects a belief that the only purpose of all of the people was to serve God. And you serve God through the church. And so that's why all of the art and everything is centered upon that, Christianity. And we have here, in a way, the Holy Roman Empire being really central in managing, governing, and ruling all over this. But this will change. And we'll start to see the secular start to creep up into prominence. And by extension, we start to see more buildings and artwork and so on. But for the meantime, we've got some pretty significant French cathedrals, and the French pretty much led the way on cathedral building, and they call that the Francais opus, or the French way. And so we'll see cathedrals go up in parts of modern day Germany, in England, and so on, in Spain as well. But this is really the development of the French. Now, this is kind of an interesting sidebar here. I think it's interesting, and that is that Paris sort of becomes a center for knowledge and learning and technology and a lot of things, and really kind of central to the church. And in fact, they get so prominent in this regard that, you know, by the time we're talking 15th century, 16th century, they're setting up a separate papacy in the south of France. They have a second pope who is French. And so anyway, that was short-lived. But French pope had, the French papacy had some good taste, because actually the great Renaissance artist Leonardo da Vinci was an artist to the French papacy in the 16th century. So anyway, I digress. And this is Chartres. And you can see mid-12th century. And these things are going up in pretty short order. This is rebuilt in 1194 because there was a fire. We saw Saint Denis. This is all 12th century stuff. And I showed you the video, and I hope you'll remember the point that the Com Academy made about how Abbot Suger reinterpreted the idea of cathedrals, holy places, places of worship, to let in light. And what I wanted to add to what all they said about Saint Denis and letting in light, where the other cathedrals, as I say, just the apse would have windows and let in light. The rest was chandelier at best. We actually have language that persists from those days. We use these as metaphors. When you shed light on something, have you heard that? Shed light, or if maybe even having an epiphany, if you will. I saw the light. Or, on the other hand, you could empathize with the congregation and say you were left in the dark. We still use light and dark as metaphors for consciousness, and that's really what Sujet was talking about when they let the light into the cathedrals. And so I'm talking about Chartres, and this is, again, we got the ambulatory, we got the the porch of the confessor. See, that's an interesting thing. That's anyway, we have the ambulatory, we have the altar up here, and we have the devotional shrines around the perimeter. And this is what it looks like. Chartres, again, the cross design. And so this is what it looks like from the front. And it's pretty well adorned at the portal here. But still, you know, there's a lot of space. And we have the lintel sculptures up here on top, sculptures up here on the roof, and here. But, you know, it's not completely adorned. I just want to point that out because that'll change, and that'll change in time. And so anyway, Chartres, we start to see more height, and it becomes higher. That becomes part of the deal, where as these cathedrals are built, they become higher and higher and higher. And I wanted to add to the video about Abbot Sujet, and they talked about the pointed vaults and the columns and how they put the weight down. I know I talk a lot about buttresses and weight distribution and archways and things like that, but these inventions are critical. And if we're looking at architecture, we have to kind of look at the technology as well as the aesthetics and as well the purpose of the building and how that building was put together and what it appears to be as it relates to the belief system and the power structure. And so anyway, Chartres Cathedral, and this is a jam statue, which is in the portal, which is right next to the door. St. Theodore, we've seen St. Theodore. We saw that in Byzantine art. We talked about that in the iconography of the Virgin Mary with Saints George and Theodore. And you see here, it's got a spear and a sword. This guy's ready for battle. Warrior saints. See, they get revitalized in this era. And in part, they had to kind of reconcile something here. So it's really quite a contradiction in the belief system, and that is they were out marching around people like King Louis IX, Richard the Lionhearted. They are warriors, and they're going into Jerusalem, and they're fighting, and in some cases extremely brutal combat. How do you reconcile that with thou shalt not kill? and the teachings of Jesus that says, love thy neighbor. I mean, we had the 10 Commandments, and Jesus kind of expounded on those 10 Commandments, and especially peace. That's why we see Christ giving the sign of peace all of the time. He's referred to as the Prince of Peace. How do you reconcile being a good Christian with going over and killing a bunch of people? And so that's why these saints, these warrior saints, actually get new life. They bring them up. They become important in the belief system again. And I just reminded me of something. I don't know if I have it here, but if I don't, I'll bring it next time. There are even depictions of Christ as a warrior. They'll show Christ with the halo with the cross, and he's wearing a suit of armor. Christ the warrior. So, hey, how is that for cognitive dissonance? It's just saying. So anyway, and what we see here too is the ability, talking about the craft and the aesthetic values. See, this guy is actually dressed more like a 12th, 13th century warrior. He doesn't have his breastplate on, but he looks like a modern day soldier. We'll see that kind of happen a lot too. He doesn't look like somebody from the 2nd or 3rd century. He looks like somebody that's contemporary. That'll be an issue for a long time. We see in the Renaissance period, Piero della Francesca, he does the resurrection. He does a famous painting. We won't get to that here. But they show a sarcophagus, the lid's off of it. Christ is coming, is risen from the dead. He's got a big crucifixion, and he's got the stigma, the wounds of the crucifixion. And in front are soldiers asleep, the soldiers that were set there to guard the tomb. Interestingly enough, those soldiers look like modern day Italian soldiers. They look like 15th century military figures. And so that gives kind of baits another question, at least I think it does. Oh, uh-oh, didn't want to see that. So, why would they do that? They not know about historical accuracy? Maybe. I think the bigger issue is this. They were creating paintings and statues, sculptures, if you will, to edify, to teach the public about the faith. And so if you had somebody from the 3rd century, a warrior there, who wouldn't kind of guess that this was, you would look at it and say, this is somebody from the past. I don't know what this is. So they put these figures oftentimes in contemporary clothing or in contemporary dress, or, and see, like this is like really kind of an interesting point here. What's he got on his hands? Chainmail. That's what they used for self-protection in the 13th century. So, you know, just say, sometimes being able to communicate the warrior aspect is more important than historical accuracy, just saying. And so here, this is the portal. You see, up here, not so much in adornment, but the whole portal, the tympanum, the door jambs, everything, this whole entryway is adorned with statues, religious holy figures of importance. And again, like I say, the warrior saints have their stock goes up, as well as French saints. Saint Denis gets a lot of airplay, if you will, at this time. And again, the Notre Dame. The French are big on the Virgin Mary. And so this is kind of an interesting thing here too, because as I was saying about the lower class, the whole class system that comes out of medieval times, we start to see at least a tacit, maybe an obvious acknowledgement of some regular people. Stonemason sculptors detail a stained glass window in the ambulatory Chartres Cathedral. That's pretty amazing. We haven't seen stuff like this for a long, long time. These are everyday people. Of course, they're making statues, and you can see these are basically jam figures from the portal, but you can see them working, stonemasons and sculptors. They're building the building. This is a celebration of workers. We haven't seen that in a long, long time. We saw that often in ancient Egypt. We saw that reemerge as part of Roman art. We saw more everyday people, a fruit seller and so on. And so anyway, this is changing. And as they become more prosperous, their civilization develops, this class of people actually come into their own. And I got some other evidence of that too. The rose window. This is typically in the center front of the building. This is quite elaborate, as you can see. This is like huge. The rose window, we saw one at Saint Denis. This is actually much, much more elaborate. I want to kind of zoom in on this, and this is not a very good photo. It's kind of hard to photograph stuff when light is coming through it, I just say. But you see up here, right in the center, you can, even though it's a bad photo, what is that? You can tell the iconography, Madonna with child. There's another bit of iconography here too I want to bring to your attention, and that is the doves, the Holy Spirit. And that's really significant because we don't see that many depictions of the Holy Spirit. And why? Well, in part, we know these parts of the Bible where the Holy Spirit has presented itself. Pentecost, the Holy Spirit descended upon the apostles. But we need an icon. And they were digging through, as they always do, reinterpreting the scriptures, and the Holy Spirit presented itself as in the form of a dove. And so through the centuries, they kind of haggled over what kind of dove it was and if that was appropriate iconography. But here we go. This is actually pretty standard still yet today. And over here, and the French are big on this, the fleur de lis, the lily flower. And it becomes a symbol for France, but it's also associated with the Virgin Mary. This is how tied up Notre Dame, Virgin Mary, France is. It becomes the symbol of France and simultaneously the symbol for the Virgin Mary. And so anyway, there's some gem statues, Old Testament figures. And again, oftentimes we don't have the standard iconography for Old Testament figures. Like I said the other day, you know, we know Noah and the ark, and Adam and Eve and the fruit of knowledge, and a few other, Abraham, the sacrifice of Isaac, we would know those. But other Old Testament figures we don't know. So anyway, Saints Martin, Jerome, and Gregory. Why do we know them? Because they have standard iconography. They were made saints post Christianity, or after the start of Christianity. So they were made saints. They were wholly encapsulated within Christianity. This pre-Christian, you say. And so another great cathedral, Leon, 1190s. This is 12th century building boom here. And what you see here is this actually gets more elaborate as we go. It's not particularly taller, but we got the rose window. We got some more stained glass, and I was showing you this. Oh, lancets. That's these windows here, by the way, and center in that Madonna and Child. And I want to show you this because I want to point this out from the outside. And this, no, this is, that was Saint Denis. Here we go. Rose window, lancets. Rose window. And Leon. And so you see, that becomes standard. We see the spires, they go up higher all of the time. We see the portals become more elaborate, more well decorated, stained glass, and so begun, 1190. The interior, not so much that it's adorned, but we see our lancets, we see our rose window, and we see that it gets higher. It gets higher as time passes. And it's, wanted to point that out here. This is Leon, nave, 80 feet. Paris, Chartres, height of 120, Amiens, 144. And what's happening here, it gets higher. But look at the amount of window that we see as it gets higher. Hardly any, a little more than that. And this is like huge. And so probably the most famous of the French cathedrals, Notre Dame. It too is in Paris, and it's in the center of Paris. And wanted to bring this up for you a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago in April. Let's get rid of that. Thank you. Make sure I got the right screen share. Yeah, we'll be. Watching the flames burn Notre Dame, the spiritual heart of France. And here it is. This is as it's really, look at that rose window, for example. It's just everything gets bigger and higher and better. And so anyway, it says, after historic fire tore through the ancient cathedral, and you can see they already put up scaffolding. What happened was that this really was very devastating. It was fire, and it took them a long time to put this thing out. April 15th, the world watched in disbelief. And then yet by the early hours of the next morning, the stone structure stood tall. So it burned about a day. And so anyway, there's more about that here. And it kind of, what they had to do here, by the way, is they wanted to rebuild it. And they've been working on that for 2.5 years. They almost immediately started rebuilding it. And they had a lot of photographic evidence of what it looked like at the time it was burned. But they also had a lot of records of how it was built. It was all pretty much documented. And some of the changes made through the centuries, because it did not stay the same. I guess that for me, and this is before the fire, and let's see here. I want to show you this. This is the period they call the High Gothic. You know, it's basically the late 12th, 13th centuries. I want to show you this, because this is a cutaway view of a High Gothic cathedral, Amiens. And this was the highest one that we saw in the comparative graphic there on the end. Anyway, I want to show you this. I want to point this out because people wondered how in the heck a stone building could catch on fire like that and burn. The answer is up here. And that is the roofs were made of timbers. And so what you had on Notre Dame was timbers that were 800 years old. And so they were dry. They went up very quickly. And they said that, and there are some other places where timber was used on these roofs as well. Bottom line is that this place had been rewired for electricity and electric lights. It wasn't that way originally. And so anyway, it was an electric short circuit of some sort, and it caught the timbers on fire. Of course, they were probably as inflammable as almost like gasoline or something. It was so dry, it just went right up. And then as it burned, these burning timbers were breaking off and dropping into the main cathedral area. So it was really pretty devastating. And so about the cathedral, I want to kind of point this out again to flying buttresses. It's a way that we talk about this weight distribution. This is it right here, big. And so one of the things that happens is in the 14th century, 1300s, the sculpture becomes much more humanized. And take a look at this, the Virgin and Child, Notre Dame, Paris, early 14th century. And you can see she's got personality, and she's not so rigid. She's got her weight on this leg, got her hip thrown out. Any of you guys have children? Someday. I have grandchildren. I've been doing this a lot. When they're babies, that's how you carry them. You're going to stand there for a while, throw your hip out, put your weight there, and cradle them in your arms. This is what she's doing. And so the idea of actually accounting for body language, posture, the gesture, and likewise, all of the drapery and the finery, very well done, very naturalistic, very human. They humanized the Virgin Mary. And I'll point this out too, because this is really kind of cool. The baby Christ, he doesn't have the book in his hand. He's got an old world. He's here to save the world from original sin. And here, what's this? What the heck? No guesses. A fleur de lis, a lily flower. That's what she has in her hand. This is, as I say, the symbol of Mary, and this is it. And it is a symbol of purity. And as we know in Christianity, she is a virgin. So she is pure and beautiful like the lily flower. And that's what she has in her hand. And likewise, that becomes the symbol for France. And it's spread all the way here. I talk about the St. Louis flag, named after St. Louis, Louis IX. Louisiana, how many football fans do I have here? NFL. Hallie, good. Good. Late. New Orleans Saints, what do they have on their helmets? A fleur de lis. Because they are from Louisiana, named after the same king, patron saint, France. Anyway, it's all tied together. But this is a baby that looks like a baby. Got a little chubby little chin there and stuff. And he pulling on his mother's clothing. I think this is like really pretty cool. I want to show you another statue here. This is, I wish these were in different order. There she is. Virgin of Jeanne d'Evreux from the Abbey of the Church of Saint. Again, much, much more humanized. And let's zoom in on this. Little baby touching his mother's face. Now that's what babies do. And again, much more humanized. And you can see she's in thought, much more naturalistic, much more humanized. Actually, the Khan Academy, if you care to check it out, they talk about this particular sculpture, and they talk about the humanization of Mary during this period. It goes from the icon that you guys wrote about to being very human. And so There's Amiens, and check this out. Like I say, more and more light being let in. And you can see that right here too. I mean, you don't see much from the perimeter, but this whole ambulatory area is just lit up. It's almost entirely, the walls are almost entirely made of glass. And this is a good illustration of how the ambulatory goes behind the altar. And so it's higher, it's lighter. And Reims Cathedral. I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but let's take a close-up look at this. This is 1290, so this is like in chronological terms, it's like one of the last. But it's not just the portals that are decorated. We see the rose window. We see one here. We see one there. And the portals don't have the tympanum here. They have stained glass. And in fact, if you take a look at this, it's almost like they put stained glass as much as they possibly could without making the structure so weak that it would collapse on itself. But check this out. It is adorned with all sorts of figures related to the important to the religion. And on every level, Reims. This is, as I say, high God. And so now take a look at that and compare that to some of the ones that we were looking at early on. Not that much decoration on the facade. More, but here, Chartres. This is, by comparison, very plain. And so when we get to Reims, it's a development. It is an evolution. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about the other arts. And so as the other statues become much more naturalized, much more naturalistic, I should say, jam figures in the portal actually become much more lifelike too. And they instead of having rigid poses as in this or this, they too become more like, they have body language. They're not basically, these look like they could have been carved out of a cylinder with minimal effort. And these, central doorway, these much more naturalistic. And that's Sainte-Chapelle, mid-13th century. This is where they max out. Stained glass, almost all the way up from the ceiling down to just above the door. You can see the light, and it is a sea change that happens in about 150 years. They're building and they're reconsidering what the places of worship should look like and why they have these characteristics. And all goes back to Abbot Sujet. Saint Maclou. Again, no parts of this exterior on a door. And so here, I want to say a few words about this. This is in the book, and it's under a section that says a second opinion. And it talks about the role of the cathedrals and the monasteries and how life was in medieval and Gothic times. And so what the author says here is that rather than being some devotional, like kind of far away, that these monasteries, what were monasteries and put off and inaccessible to much of the world, basically, it was the start of communities that would actually grow around the church, and that the church, the cathedral, would be central. And they still have 12th to 13th century and the fortification. They still haven't given up on that. And they still feared invaders. It still happened. And so anyway, just saying, it's a different take on the evolution. This is in Bruges, Belgium, 1230. 13th century. As I was saying, we started, while we saw the stained glass showing us the masons and the sculptors, the stone cutters. Now we got the Hall of the Cloth Guild. What we find at this time is that those people that were what we would call skilled trades, they started to, as you might say, unionize. They gathered together. They formed bonds, and the early guilds was a collection of people in a particular trade. And like these are people that are cloth makers, the cloth guild. And so they were the people that actually put cloth together from the raw materials, whether it was sheep's wool, cotton, whatever. And so look at this. That's totally secular. Hall of the Cloth Guild, and look at it. It's like cute. It's not spire. It's not a cathedral. It's not associated with the church, at least not directly. And so that class of people will become much more powerful and influential. And this marks the end of that feudal system where the lords and the church kind of control the population. And these people are finding their own. They're unionized. That's what a guild is. And one of the things that they were keen on was keeping their means of production secret. And that's where we get the term trade secrets, right out of the guilds. And this happens in Northern Europe, and it actually happens in Southern Europe too. And so these people with skills, we start to see them appear on the stained glass. By this time, they actually have enough wherewithal to build buildings, maybe not quite rivaling the cathedrals, but certainly influential. We'll see that happen in Italy too. And the courtyard of the house of Jacques Jour Bourgeois France. And so even some wealthy people are able, people not royalty, are able to start building elaborate structures. The house, look at this house. It's a mansion. Whoa, who would have thought? But see, we're getting away from this idea that I mentioned earlier in the Gothic Gothic era, excuse me, late medieval. The idea, the only reason we were put on earth was to serve God. The idea of collecting money and wealth and all of the fineries, all of the comforts, creature comforts, if you will, was all left behind because the only purpose is to get to heaven, to serve God, to do well, to get to heaven. And so this kind of private wealth in earlier times would have not been tolerated unless you were royalty, unless you were the emperor, unless you were the Pope, unless you had the blessing of the Pope. And so a lot of this really reflects a change, a sea change. And this is in the 15th century, so this is Renaissance times. And so they still do, you know, even after the invention of the printing press, which was in 1500s, they still, late 15th century, I should say, Blanche of Castile, Louis IX, and two monks. They are two monks, Blanche of Castile, Louis IX, celebrated. And so anyway, this is an example of a moralized Bible. So anyway, what you got here, and again, like I say, the monks consider themselves the heir apparent or the descendants of the writers of the gospel. So they memorialize themselves often. But at any rate, I didn't put a star by this, and I really should have. This represents a big change. May not be quite that obvious, but let me kind of help you, walk you through this to think about this. God as creator of the world, moralized Bible. So that's basically what they're doing. They're kind of putting their own imprimatur onto the Bible. And like I say, a lot of these things were done so that they could communicate to the illiterate. But there's God. And what's this thing here? I know what that's called, what it's used for. Okay, I give up. I'll give up the answer. It's a caliper, and it's something that is used in mechanical drawing and drafting and stuff, and even in measuring on a map. And you see, it looks like this, two cylinders, two prongs, and you use it like this to measure like a map or something. And if you have like the distance here, and you say, this is how far I can travel in one day, you walk this thing across your map to find out how far where you might be in 7 days or something. Vite. Absolutely, engineering. Yes, absolutely. And so this is like kind of absolutely different because we're starting to tie in mathematics and engineering to God. And up to this time, we never would have. So mathematics was a human concept. Engineering is a human concept. This is how people do things. God, as they say, moves in mysterious ways. And it can't be explained by simple engineering. But that's what's happening here. And it shows you the influence of mathematics and engineering. And they're putting those skills, showing them in the hands of God, which is really quite remarkable. We would never, ever imagine that prior to this time. And so, more manuscript illuminations, and you can see they kind of keep the standard format, but symbolism over naturalism. Samuel anointing David in the battle of David and Goliath. There he is. There's David. He's got the sling in his hand. And he even has his name. There's David and Goliath. Sling hit him in the head, not toast. And so this is Jean Purcell. Purcell brothers, and there's another couple of guys called the Limbourg brothers, and they do fantastic manuscript illumination. And what's different about this? This ends up in the hands of the secular part of the culture. It's not done from a monastery anymore. It's like individuals making manuscripts. Jean Purcell, Eternal Christ, and Annunciation. And so anyway, private enterprise, capitalism, it's rising, it's happening. This is the they call that the age of mercantilism. It happens, it develops over time. Ordinary people began to acquire wealth, and that's big. Why is this happening? In part because the papacy, if you will, the church, is kind of losing their control over people. And so, of course they are, because you've got the cloth guild powerful enough to build their own magnificent building. We got artist guilds, we got masons, we got stone cutters guilds, we got carpenters guilds, artist guilds, and it all stems from late medieval. And I can kind of add to some of that this. What I want to add to that is that what we'll see in the 14th century, one of the worst catastrophes in European history, and that was the bubonic plague. And that really kind of upsets the whole social order. But there wasn't anarchy or anything. It was just that a lot of people died. It was awful. They lost a major portion of their population. And what resulted from this was that they had a lot of stuff they had accumulated and built up a great deal of wealth and capability to make stuff. For instance, the artist guilds, they had figured out how to make art, say painters, and they traded their knowledge with each other, but they kept it secret. It was called trade secrets, as I said. But they had capacity. They had industrial capacity, pre-factory, but they had the capacity for prosperity right there. And same thing in agriculture. For example, agriculture was booming. And then you take away half of the population, they have a labor shortage, to be sure. But they have a ton of arable land to grow crops, and they have fewer people to feed. So there was all of this structural wealth and fewer people to share it. And that was one of the legacies. And the other part of the legacy is that this whole feudal system, in the meantime, is just crumbling. And so we have independent kingdoms. We have the Holy Roman Emperor, to be sure, but we also get the King of France being much more preeminent, not under the thumb of the papacy. Likewise in England, they became much more independent. Was it all under the control of the Pope? So we see a whole change in the social order. And what that leads to is the Renaissance. And so, yeah, Castle of Blood, lit from a jewelry box, and this is really kind of cool too. 1330, 1350, mid 14th century. And again, this is not religious. This is secular. This is about as secular as anything you see from the Roman era. And these guys jousting, that was sport among the royalty, to be sure. But not something connected directly with the church. And so, and we have some other examples here to kind of finish out this chapter. More cathedrals, the French way, the spread across Europe. And I want to point this out too. This is kind of a really cool little bit. Map of the world, which is really kind of interesting. There's a couple of things that's really interesting. One is that it's round, so that tells you a little something. But this, see that? That's a cross, that's a crucifix. That is Jerusalem. And it shows you that at least the religious doctrine still kind of governs a lot of things. And if you would talk to anybody from the 12th, 13th, 14th century, pre-Columbus, pre-Renaissance, you ask where the center of the world was, they would always say Jerusalem. It's the center of the religious world, but it was also the center of the world. And this is an English cathedral, 13th century. Again, this has a long legacy, and again, the jam statues, the sculpture, everything becomes much more lifelike. That wasn't an issue through the Byzantine era, through the medieval times. There was more, the symbology was more important, but everything's getting humanized. And so again, the technology, the French way, this is what churches look like. This is what cathedrals look like for a good long time. And here is one from the 13th century. And again, we're talking about Chartres, Denis, Leon, which had much more ornamentation. You see, it keeps going. It's stained glass. Again, bigger and bigger and bigger. So much that, and you see a lot of it up here on the second, just under the roof. So this is like kind of past time period. But this is the legacy, if you will. That aesthetic where it gets more and more ornate, it's more and more decorative, it's more complex. They go higher, they fill up all of the space. Every bit of the space is important. They let in as much light as possible, and they try to build it as high as possible. And that's kind of the issue. That's kind of the description of the Gothic cathedral. And I want to add that the spires, they get higher over time, and it's not just Christianity. There are a lot of faiths that build up as a symbolic and a physical connection to the heavens. And this is higher than everything else. It's an attempt to reach to the heavens. That goes all the way back to Mesopotamia, the Tower of Babel, and so on. That's been a thing. We build tall buildings now, build them taller than ever. But it's not to reach the heavens. It's not to connect with God. But it's more about status, more about power, more about wealth and importance. Empire State Building for America. So, yeah, and you know, as I say, it goes through Austria, Germany, England, France, Spain, trying Death of the Virgin, Timpano, Strasbourg. More lifelike, again, crucifixion. How's that? How's that for graphic? So they've come to an idea that making things more natural, more human, more lifelike, that leads to Cathedral of Cologne. That leads to let me end on this. I thought I was going to get to 14. I guess we'll do that. Yes, we'll do that next week. And any questions about the quiz? Your choice, your 2-3 paragraph. Or I like this. Well, in that case, enjoy this beautiful sunshine while you can. It's November. The sun is not long. Have a good weekend, you guys. You too. Thank you.
I just wrote about 2 more topics in my list that I wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that is an option. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that we'll get to China after we do the lake. I think in Italy, we're going to go to India.
Okay.
And then China. So yeah, it's going to be a while, but yeah, it's part of this course.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay.
You too. Yeah, see you.